So, Mr. Ginsberg, thank you first of all for joining me today on the podcast. And
My pleasure.
I I did have a chance to see you on Netflix. And first of all, I just want to let everybody know that you are the a founder of Forever Family Foundation and the author of the Medium Explosion. And you currently are featured on Netflix on a documentary series called Surviving Death, and you are in season one, episode four.
Correct.
Yes. What did I leave out?
Nothing. We started, you mentioned the foundation, which
Yeah.
we started back in 2003, and it's grown. We have about 12,000 members, worldwide. And over the years, it just shows that there's a thirst for knowledge. And today, I think, especially in this age of the pandemic, a lot of people are questioning their own mortality, whereas they never gave it much thought before. And I think that's one of the reasons that more and more people are interested in the subject of is there a possibility that we're more than our physical bodies? Is the afterlife a real possibility?
Yeah. Is it a real possibility?
Yeah, if you asked me that question, Chuck, 20 years ago, I would say to you, no. We are our brains, and when we die, our brains are no more, so what could possibly survive? I believed in the finality of death. I think many people do to a certain extent, and that perpetuates, fear and conflict and phobias and so forth. So, circumstances in my own life, very often trauma is a trigger to exploration. So after the death of my daughter, I started to search to try to find out in my own mind because I was left-brained and I was a logical thinker and I needed evidence for everything. So I started meeting with scientists and medical doctors and researchers around the country that studied consciousness, studied the mind, and I wanted to find out if there was any real evidence that something survived. And when we say survival, as we refer to it in the research community, what really survives? Certainly, it's not our physical bodies, it's cremated or it's in the ground, but what survives is our soul or our mind or our consciousness, and I use those words, interchangeably. So the fact is that the evidence shows that our minds can act independently of our physical brains. And once you believe that, the concept of surviving your own death becomes somewhat logical. And there's,
Mhm.
we can get into the specific evidence for it, but when you step back and examine the totality of the evidence, as I did, after fighting it for 4 or 5 years, I refused to believe it. Eventually, I relented under the weight of the evidence. And you got a little taste of that in the Netflix series when they talked about near death experiences and after death communications and reincarnation and so forth. So
Yeah.
yes, there is evidence that we do survive.
Now, it some oftentimes or sometimes you hear uh, that there's this. I'm just gonna say portal, but some people don't leave Earth and go beyond. So there's that. I don't. It's not purgatory, but their spirit or their soul is still here, and you could feel them. You could connect with them. But is there a point in time where that ends and then they're gone, or is that the point in time when people like myself, we say, okay, I'm at ease, I'm at peace now, I can let go. I
Yeah, yeah, I understand the question. People talk about earthbound, spirits, that have attachments to the physical world and haven't kind of released. I mean, the evidence seems to show, and when I talk about evidence, it comes mainly through near-death experiences and mediumship and channeled writings, is that those in another dimension and it's a dimension of higher, frequency, and vibration as opposed to this dense physical environment, are able to communicate even after long, periods of time.
Mm.
But to I suspect, though, as you were kind of hinting that after a certain amount of development or growth, whatever you want to call it, that the need to communicate with their loved ones in the physical plane is not as great as it once was. I mean, if you think about it, my greatest priority after I, pass on would be to let my loved ones know that that I still exist in some form, and I would do that either directly, trying to communicate directly, mind to my loved ones' mind in the physical world, or through an intermediary like a medium. And the way I would give evidence that if I just give you a message that I love you, how would you verify that? I mean, obviously, I would, but if I can give you specific information, facts, names, things that only you would know, and there's no way that, that the medium would know, then, that falls in the category of evidence. So I would say that, we've seen cases where mediums bring through, spirit entities that have been gone for, decades,
Mm.
or there are cases of either 50 years or 100 years. So I suspect that it becomes more and more difficult for those as they progress through the other dimensions to still make contact with the physical world, but it's still possible.
Okay. Do you think that one's belief really plays a large role in this, whether they accept um, that that spirit or that soul or that energy is still here, or do you think that the belief, yeah, does the belief block them from believing and opening their eyes to the possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't believe in it, I didn't believe in it
Hmm.
after my daughter passed. So things were happening all around me. My wife was somewhat intuitive, and she would pick up on everything, but I was oblivious to it because it didn't fit into my frame of reference. So if you believe that death is final and it's impossible, I'm not going to recognize any communications that come through, no matter how profound that they are. I think that there's a progression. If most of the surveys that are done today, when they ask people if they believe in an afterlife, there's a surprisingly high percentage of people consistently that say that they do. It's somewhere in the range between 70 and 80%, depending on the particular survey. But I think what's happening is that when people say that they believe in an afterlife, what they're really saying is that they hope. They hope there's an afterlife could be based upon their faith or based upon, other factors. Gradually, when you start to explore this stuff, that hope could change into belief.
Hmm.
And that belief can come through direct personal experiences or through your own research. Ultimately, that belief can change into a knowing, where you've had something so profound, whether that be an after death communication or a near death experience or something else that you no longer question. And I think that once you reach that stage of no longer questioning, it has a lot of positive effects. It could diminish your grief. It could enable you to live your life more fully, because you're not constantly afraid of that I'm going to be extinguished forever. That there's more to come. The other part, I remember. I was just thinking about this morning, Chuck. Is that when I first started doing this work, every once in a while I would be somewhat hesitant when we used to educate people about the evidence that showed that the worlds or dimensions to come are better than this, physical existence. And I used to worry, are we somehow encouraging, people to take their own lives? Because we're painting that they may be living this miserable existence in the physical realm, and now that we're painting this picture of this blissful existence, elsewhere. But it's not really that, it's not the case. I think that we're here in this physical realm for a purpose, and our existence after this physical world is based in part, or I I shouldn't say in part, wholly on what we did and how we reacted and the compassion that we showed in this physical world. So people that were miserable human beings, when they move over to the other side, I'll call it the other side, they tend to congregate with people of like mind, and
Hmm.
character. So they near death experiences talk about having a life review. Not all near death experiences, but a great percentage of them. And in this life review, as they're crossing into the next world, it's like a movie reel, they describe it as, and it runs, their whole life runs before them. And they are able to feel the joy and the love and the happiness that they imparted upon others. And that's great. But conversely, they also feel the pain that they cause others by their actions. And that's not such a pleasant feeling. So the bottom line is that the self judgment involved, we decide where we belong. It's not that we're going to sit before some panel or tribunal and say you go here or you go there, but we know inherently where we belong. Now, even the most miserable of people that move to the other side, they may stay in one plane for a considerable amount of time, but even they elevate, as they move through time, not time as we know it, but time where the past, present, and future is all intermingled, and they gradually complete their, soul, so to speak. So
Hmm.
I think that, because if you believe it's tied together. Because if you believe that life is totally random, and if you believe that it's chaotic and that this is that we're extinguished forever after we physically die, you don't have much incentive to do good. You figure, hell, it's not going to matter, But so I might as well rape and pillage and do whatever heck I want. But if you believe that your existence is going to be tied into things that you do, it takes on a different perspective, and that seems to be what the channeled reports tell us, and all these experiencers tell us.
Yeah. Uh, as far as all that goes, with your Family Forever or the Forever Family Foundation,
Yeah,
it's from what I gather when I watch it, it seemed like it's everybody's there to help one another, try to open their minds and see. Now, are there people that walk away still being super skeptical and saying, I did not get the evidence that I was looking for? And is
yeah.
there evidence that they're looking for? Is it just, um, I don't want to say too much, but is it so unattainable? I want them to talk to me. I want to hear the voice and I want to see them right now move that cup. And then if it doesn't happen immediately, they dismiss everything. Do you get folks like that?
Yeah, it's an excellent point because we live in this world of instant gratification.
Hmm.
Everything's available at the click of a mouse, and we want it, and we want it now, and but that's not the way this stuff works. I mean, the phenomena that we talk about is spontaneous in nature, and you can't force it to happen. So you have to lay a foundation for belief. It's a process. First you talk about ways in which our minds are not the same as our physical brains. You talk about telepathy, mind to mind communication, and you talk about the evidence from that. ESP evidence, remote viewing evidence, where people can, for lack of a better term, send their consciousness to a distant site and then draw accurate depictions of what they see,
Hmm.
and things. Distant healing, psychokinesis, where the mind has the power to affect matter. And once you believe that from the evidence that our minds can act outside of our physical, skulls, then you open up to other things. And so you talk about people who had near-death experiences where they meet every definition that science tells us, medical science, of death. I mean, they have no heartbeat, they have no respiration, they have no brain waves, they have no reflexes. For all intents and purposes, they are dead. And yet, what do they report? They report leaving their body, Actually, some people that are in the operating room, see the surgeons, working on them. They report clear and lucid thinking, you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and downloading all of this knowledge. And if you are hallucinating, and if it's the product of oxygen deprivation and so forth, it's going to be anything but clear and lucid. It's going to be fragmented. It's more like a hallucination. You're going to be jumping all over the place, and yet they have more. They can think clearer than they ever thought before. So that doesn't. What does that tell you? It tells you that their consciousness is kind of separating from their damaged brain and still operating, and not only operating, but operating at a much higher level. So you learn about things like that, the evidence from mediumship. You mentioned my book, The Medium Explosion. I mean, in that book, um, I didn't make a lot of friends in the mediumship community initially because, I state that based upon my observations and my own research, that 85 to 90% of the practicing mediums today cannot do what they claim.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that they're all frauds. Some are, but it means that they have some intuitive ability, but they don't have enough ability, or they haven't progressed to the point where they can communicate with a discarnate, entity. But the remaining 10%, and we've certified some of those people, over the years. We conduct a medium certification program where we evaluate evidence under controlled conditions, and we can actually determine who can do it and who can't.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some throughout history, and certainly today as well, that can have extraordinary abilities, to communicate, and it's specifics, and it's facts and features. Now, 100 years ago when mediums did work, and there's no Google and there's no internet, so they couldn't look things up. And we're very much aware today that a medium can. I mean, we caught a medium recently that was doing, because of COVID, a lot of the mediums stopped doing personal readings person to person. They do it via Zoom. And we saw a medium that was doing a reading, and they had the person's name on the Zoom screen. And they split their screen. On the other side of the screen, they had the person's Facebook page open, and they were spitting back all the information. And it's amazing how much information you can get on social media, right?
Right.
And so they were totally fraud. She was totally fraudulent, and the sitter, not knowing the difference, the person getting the reading was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! How would you know that?" Well, so you have to be aware of things today that you weren't aware of then. But mediumship does provide a tremendous amount of evidence, and a really powerful medium reading, especially to somebody who's on the fence. They're not really sure whether they believe in this stuff, and they can walk away, and it can be life transforming, because now they walk away with renewed hope and comfort, and belief that their loved one still survives. So there's a lot of evidence that's come through, in the mediumship world. You may have seen in the Netflix series of reincarnation cases of children with past life memories, and
Yes.
the researchers go out and they become like investigators. They pull up the old records of the person that they claim that they used to be, and they visit when available, the person's home, and they pull medical records and so forth. And some of those cases are extremely, compelling. Um, After death communications, or people call them signs, happen every day. Dream visitations is probably the most common form. The theory being that, when you're at that REM stage of sleep, and that chatter mind is kind of set aside, the person in spirit has like a clear conduit to get through to you,
Mm-hmm.
without the use of a medium. And you have these dreams that stay with you, and in the dream, you can talk to your loved ones sometimes, or hug them and kiss them, and have conversations. So those can also be, life transforming, to certain people. So, the point is, I can take all of those different things that I just talked about, and I can dismiss any one, by saying, oh, no, this is just coincidental, it's not real. But if you're able to step back and you learn and you read about all of the evidence, life after death becomes logical. It seems to be the most logical explanation. So it's not all woo woo. Like I thought it was. 20 years ago, and there are a lot of there are a lot of credible, well credentialed people in the field that have devoted their lives to the study of these phenomena.
Yeah. I would imagine that Eastern and Western culture makes a big difference too on how we believe and what we were taught to believe. And then as far as the mediumship goes, what I've always thought too is many of them probe. And if we're in that grieving period, and I think even in your show you mentioned it, we want to believe so much that they say, I think this person is, and then you're like, yeah, yeah, they're wearing something green. Yes, yes. And then they're probing and they go on that. Um, and my fear of all this is, or my thought, I don't know if it's really a fear right now, but there are so many people who are grieving. They want either closure, they want to stay in communication contact with their loved ones, that the fraudulent mediums are out there making this as a money making business. Like I said, they'll do it over the phone and they have that split screen and just as I have right now, I've got some notes over on one side, I've got you over here and I've got me over there and I
Yeah.
can speak intelligently or at least try to.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right, and it's one of the reasons that I wrote the book because I wanted to educate people as what to look for,
Hmm.
and I call it an epidemic, really, because there are practitioners on every corner now. And some call themselves psychics, some people call themselves mediums. Incidentally, there is a difference
Oh,
because all all mediums, it's said that all mediums are psychic, and they are, but not all psychics are mediums. So you may have the ability to read my mind, which is extraordinary in and of itself, and nothing to dismiss. But you have no ability to talk to somebody, that's in the spirit world. So it gets confusing because mediumship is mind to mind communication. It just so happens that one of the parties involved doesn't have a physical body anymore, but they still have a mind, they still have consciousness. And when we do conduct these certification sessions, it's very hard to discern the two. So when I'm training a sitter, I'm training a person that's going to score the evidence that they're getting from the medium. The way I explain it to them is, let's say, I'm the medium, and I say to you, Chuck, did you just paint your bedroom blue? And let's say that you did paint your bedroom blue. So that would seem to be extraordinary piece of evidence, but not when it comes to mediumship. It's worthless because it's not coming from anybody that's in spirit. So it doesn't
okay.
show that there's an afterlife. It just shows that mind to mind communication exists. But if I'm the medium and I'm giving you, Chuck, 10 pieces of solid evidence about your deceased dad. And then I say to you, Dad's also telling me he likes that you painted your bedroom blue. Then that becomes evidential because I've already given you the evidence, so you're communicating with your dad. So then you can accept it.
Hmm.
So that so the sitters, they can't score pure psychic information for our purposes. They have to score the person in spirit has to be identified. And a lot of mediums, sometimes I'll ask mediums when I give them preliminary questions looking for possible red flags. I'll say to them, what do you think is more important? Messages of love, or evidence? And surprisingly, mediums sometimes say, oh, it's the messages of love that are most important. And that's not what I want to hear because I can, of course, I mean, how many parents don't love their children? How many, how many children don't love their parents? Yeah, of course they love you, but I can't accept any message unless now I know that you're communicating with them. So I'm very wary of mediums that say that it's the messages that are most important. They are important,
Hmm.
but only after the evidence has been established so that without a doubt that you're communicating with your deceased loved one.
Yeah, kind of like that gentleman in the Netflix program where he mentioned my dad has to say something about my hair. and
Yeah.
nothing was said until right at the very end before they were getting ready to leave, and the medium said, "Oh, by the way, your dad's saying something about your hair." So
Right.
in that situation, it was a confirmation,
Yeah.
uh, so that they are connected or speaking to that person on the other side, rather than, like you said, that feel good. Oh, they want you to know that they are okay and they love you. That's it. Here's, pay up. You
Yeah.
got the message, right? Oh, I feel great
Right.
now. And
My job is done. Right. Yeah.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
uh
Well, you're right, and there's also a difference between general information and specific information. So, as an example, if you're the medium, Chuck, and you're doing a reading for me, and you look at me, you could size up my approximate age and so forth, my ethnicity, and all sorts of things. So, if you say to me, Bob, I have your deceased grandmother here. Do you have a grandmother that's in spirit? Well, I have to mark it true, but despite the fact that she'd be 120 now if she still was with us. So, but because I have a grandmother in spirit, I have to mark it true. But if you say, Chuck, I have your grandmother Rebecca here, and my grandmother's name was Rebecca, that information should carry more weight in the scoring than just the general piece.
hmm
So the more specific they are, the better that they do in the scoring. And sometimes they come up with, obscure things that, you've never mentioned to anybody. And sometimes they'll come up with things because the argument is still made that somehow the medium is reading your mind. But sometimes they'll give you information that you don't know to be true or not. You have no idea, and then you later investigate and you find out, yes, it was true. So that would tend to dispel the notion that they were reading my mind because I didn't know it.
hmm
Yeah.
uh I want to find out a little bit more from you, for the listeners and the viewers. What are the evidence that people look for or want to look for, or that they should look for, or is it so general? As an example, in your case, it showed that you walked into, I think, your kitchen, and the lights are dancing, they're flickering, doing all this stuff, and you were so much in doubt that you hired an electrician the next day, I think it said, and
Yeah. You're right. I did, and that was my nature. So those circumstances. I mean, we were talking about, my wife and I were talking about my daughter in spirit, and then we walked into our kitchen and I gave that clip to Netflix, because my wife had filmed it on her phone, and there was a series of 9 hi hats in the kitchen, and they, it never happened before, and we had already lived in the house for 10 years, and they were just going crazy. There was this light show, as you saw, and I'm just standing there, looking at it, and what's going through my mind, yeah. My wife had this inner knowing that this was a communication. I, on the other hand, said it's a short somewhere, and I'll find out. And then it stopped, and we walked away, and I walked back into the kitchen again, and then we had another 5 minutes of this light show. And of course, as you mentioned, the next morning I had an electrician there. He took down all of the hi hats. He removed all the switches from the wall. There was nothing wrong. It never happened again. It never happened prior. It never happened in 10 years after that. So then you can accept that. I could accept it because I ruled out the material explanations. Then I could accept the spiritual, explanation. There's all sorts of things. There's another thing called electronic voice phenomena. Not too many people know about that, but it's kind of a simple process, and researchers have been studying that for quite a while, many, many, many years. And if you can turn on a recording device. Back in the day, it was reel to reel, tape recorders. Now it's every phone has a recorder, and you just turn on a recording device, and you kind of set your intention to talk to somebody in the spirit world, and you let it run for 20 or 30 seconds, and then you shut it off, and then you play it back. When there is a voice that appears, it never appears live while it's happening. I have no idea why. That's always the way it is, but you could hear it on playback. It's not like it's going to happen all the time. There are people that experiment with it for 6 months or a year before they ever, get a voice. But very often, when you play back the recording, you hear a voice, and sometimes the voice is not intelligible. and that really has no evidential value, but sometimes the voices are crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
And what I used to do is when we used to get these recordings, I used to bring it into a group of people, let's say 10 or 15 people, and I would play, the recording, and I would ask everybody to write down what they think they heard. And if only one person heard it and 14 people didn't, I didn't give it much value. But if all 15 people heard the same thing, it's hard to make the argument that we're just making sense out of nonsense. All 15 people heard the same thing. So certain voices are really incredible. I have there's a medium. Her name happens to be Janet Mayer, and she's certified by our foundation, and she's also a close friend of the family. And my wife passed away last September, and then after that, Janet, even though she was a medium, as a hobby, she used to experiment in electronic voice phenomena, and she decided to write every week at the same time. She would write down a series of about 7 or 8 questions that she wanted to ask of my wife, in spirit. And she would then send me the recordings, and some of it, was I couldn't understand, but some were extraordinary. Like one day she said, "Fran, what is the name of the organization that you founded?" And then you hear clearly, Forever Family Foundation. Another time it happened to be my birthday, and she said, "Do you have a message for Bob?" And then you hear, "Happy birthday." So if you could rule out fraud, and I can in this case because I know this medium person very, very well, and I don't even know how you would you would manifest that in a fraudulent process. That it's really it's really intriguing to a lot of people because you have evidence, hard evidence, in the form of the recording. It's not something that popped into your mind. So there are things that are like that people are not aware of, but yet they happen, on a regular basis, and that's just another way of communicating.
I two comments. Um, well, first is you saying that and talking about the voice and the recordings, and then people either dismissing it. As soon as you start talking about it, and I'm getting more, I got the chills. So, what I want to say is that do you think that people, when they start to receive, and like me, getting the chills, and all of a sudden they might say, "Oh, I see the hair standing on my arms and my hands," then they cut it. They're like, they do something to cut it to say, "This is not real. It's not happening. I'm not scared." So that second part of this is, do you think the fear of all of a sudden something coming in for communication makes people all of a sudden get on this high alert and they do whatever they can to shut it down, to turn it off?
Yeah,
Is
that's a very perceptive comment, and it's absolutely true because we it's instilled upon us in our whole lives, through our family and through the media and movies and everything else, that things that we can't perceive with our known physical senses is something to be feared.
Mhm.
Even some religions, preach that. So people are fearful of things that they can't touch and smell, and hear, and very often that's exactly what happens. They, even in a dream visitation, they wake up or they shut it down. I once had a woman at one of our grief retreats, and she was in horrible grief, and she was really on the fence about all this stuff. And I said, what would it take? I mean, what if you anything in the world? What would it take for you to be absolutely convinced that your daughter's still existed? And she said, if my daughter appeared to me and I could see her, that would be it. And we know there are cases of apparitions, throughout history of people in these other dimensions manifesting themselves in physical form. But it's rare, let's face it, it doesn't happen very often. And I saw this woman at another retreat about 4 years later, and I started talking to her again, and she said, Bob, it happened. I said, what? She said, I woke up and there was my daughter, sitting at the foot of the bed and staring at me, And I said, so what happened? She said, I was scared out of my mind and I let out a gasp and then my daughter disappeared. That's exactly to illustrate your point. Here, this is something that should be, that she wished for 5 years. It's something that she hoped and that would happen. It's something to be treasured. Her daughter is visiting her to show her that she's still around and she's with her. And yet, fear still took over,
Hmm.
and that happens. It's very hard. And that's why it's important, I think, to educate the people about all this stuff because it lessens the fear and it becomes more acceptable. I mean, I'll tell you another quick one. I had about a year, about probably maybe 2 years after my daughter passed, I had some physical ailment and I decided to go to my doctor. I don't remember what the ailment was. And the doctor happened to be a friend of mine. And we're sitting there and he said, oh, Bob, haven't seen you in, quite a while. What are you up to these days? And I said, you really want to know? He says, yeah. I said, I'm studying survival of consciousness. And he looked at me and we just a little bit puzzled, and we just continued talking for another 5, 10 minutes. He says, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "What?" He said, "What's survival of consciousness?" And then I started to have a discussion like we're having now. That the mind is not the same as the brain, and we talked for probably 25 minutes while people were rioting in his waiting room. He never did ask me what was wrong with me, but he was interested. And then he closed the door and he got very quiet and he said, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah. He said, my father died 8 years ago. And I said, yeah. He said, and he died at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I had a lot of patients in the hospital, and I had to check up on them. So I called my answering service, a little bit later in the morning, and the the answering service started reading back his messages and said, "Doctor, your father called," and he said, "My father died at 9 o'clock this morning." And he said, I'm so sorry, doctor. We must have gotten the message wrong. You must have said your father-in-law." He says, "My father-in-law has been dead for 16 years." He said, "What time did the message come in?" And she said, "At 9:15." And he said, "Read me back the message." And the message was, "Frank, it's me. I'm okay." Now, he held this in for the decade that had passed. Never told a soul, never told his family, never told his wife, certainly never told a colleague, but yet he kept this inside. It was kind of extraordinary. I mean, there are very few explanations for that. But here, after he heard the stuff that was coming out of my mouth, he knew I was the person that was not going to judge anything that he said. And I guarantee you, in the 15 years that have passed since then, he still never told another soul. So I tell that as an example of how sad it is that we feel we're so fearful about being labeled or judged that we don't simply tell others that are close to us the experiences that we had.
Hmm.
Just simply tell them. I mean, and let them. So be it. But at least they're aware of it. So we encourage people to share these experiences they have, and the more that they share, the more accepted that they'll be, and the less fear that they'll be associated with it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of this is the embarrassment part. You may have received that message or whatever it might be, but you're embarrassed to tell your friends, your colleagues, people, because like you said, they'll label you as a nutcase or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of this that you're talking about, I was very similar to you, is very, very skeptical about all this. But then I start to think, is even as far as our conscious mind not being attached to our physical self, is we always hear that we use just a fraction of our brain and we're all on electrons and all the electrical currents running through. So why can't it? Why can't it exist outside of the physical? So, if we're still saying, well, we don't use but 8% of our brain or whatever it might be, well, what's that other 92%? Is and as you mentioned, we're in this REM stage or just prior to, is it all of a sudden our minds open up um, just because we were more free. And then now we are either seeing or visualizing. When I say visualizing, I mean closing my eyes and I see some shapes and things like that. And then you have to try to interpret those shapes. I think this is not exactly, but even on that Netflix show, the woman says, I get messages from my mom through the clouds. I see the shapes of the clouds, and those are the messages. And I think a lot of times people do, or they might see something with their eyes closed, but they're just not interpreting it because they're not open in their mind. Uh, that's
Yeah,
just my take, is we're not using our full brain power. So how can we doubt a lot of this?
right. And a lot of people, when they do receive information, they question it. I once did a survey where I sent out to like about 10,000 members a survey, and one of the questions was, if you had your choice, would you rather receive communication from your deceased loved one directly or through the services of a medium? And when I designed the question, I fully expected the overwhelming majority to say I'd rather get the communication directly.
Hmm.
But that's not what I saw. Most people said I'd rather get it through a medium. So then I started to explore why they said that. One of the things is you addressed already. They're fearful of getting the information, themselves. And then the other common answer was, if I get the communication myself, I'm going to question it. I'm going to wonder whether I'm making it up, because of my grief or something else. Whereas if I get it told to me by a professional, a third party like a medium, then I could trust the information more. So it's interesting, and it goes back to what we were talking about. People receive this information all the time. Sometimes even in the case of near-death experience, or in these deathbed visions, or people that have Alzheimer's, or even in a coma, the physical apparatus, the receiver, the brain is damaged. But that doesn't mean the signal is not still being sent. If you think of your brain as a radio,
Right.
receiver. So the receiver, the information is still surrounds us, but sometimes we have to bypass that damaged radio to pick up on information. And that's why even people today recommend that if you're sitting with somebody that's not conscious or in a coma, talk to them, because on another level, they'll hear you. It's just hearing in a different way.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, the first thing that popped into my mind is autism. They're on a different spectrum. It's a lot of us will say, um, I want to be sensitive about how put this, but a lot of
Yeah.
people will think that an autistic child or person is not smart, but they are on a different plane, and they have intelligence, and possibly that higher intelligence, because they don't have that they don't have that person sitting on their shoulder telling them don't believe or that's not true. So they're I think that they are open to understanding so much more than what we are, because we are so close-minded in a lot of things.
You're right, and of course you're familiar with autistic savants. I mean, they're taking,
Hmm.
they're doing things that we can't even imagine with our own, normally with our own brains, intense mathematical calculations and so forth. It also has been found out that a very large percentage of people with autism are highly psychic, and have greatly enhanced intuitive abilities. One of the scientists on our scientific advisory board, a medical doctor, Dr. Diane Powell, has devoted a good part of her career to studying children with autism, specifically with their psychic ability, and some of them display extraordinary psychic ability. So again, it's has nothing to do with a damaged physical brain, but everything to do with all the other information and receiving the information directly through other means.
So if you were to say to somebody two things as far as a grieving process and accepting the possibility that there is life after death, what are a couple of things that you would tell them, um, how to accept it? Or I'm not sure how to say this, or if I'm even coming across
Yeah.
right. This conversation is so deep, and I will tell you personally that I've had some of these experiences, and as I mentioned, I was very similar to you, very, very skeptical, very doubtful, and even though I've had some of these experiences, I still question what I see, but then I also pray, or prayer is the not the right word to use, but that's the only word I could think of. I hope that it happens again, and I hope that I am able to receive and interpret it. So going back to the initial question, what I was asking is, what are a couple of things that you could give to people who are listening and watching,
Well,
how to accept
yeah.
this?
Well, let me say first that being an open-minded skeptic is good. You should never just accept anything at face value. That's different from being a closed-minded skeptic, because a closed-minded skeptic just refuses to accept any evidence or the data. They just have blinders on. Open-minded skeptics always question and always explore, and that's how you can change the way you think by not being sure and then being convinced. The other part of it is that there are many regarding life after death. I mean, there have been many scientific studies published in peer reviewed journals that show that those who believe in life after death do better in their grief than those who do not. And it's logical because what could really give you, I mean, yeah, you could be treated in different ways by a practitioner, a therapist, or prescribed medication. But what could give you any more hope than believing that they still exist? So
Hmm.
that to me makes sense. So, my advice is really to remain open, and pay attention. And don't try to force anything, to happen, but just keep exploring and learning. I think getting to that knowing stage comes two different ways. One, if you're lucky enough to have some sort of profound experience, or two, which in my case was just being absorbed. I mean, I read literally hundreds upon hundreds of books. I mean, I have a library probably with a couple of thousand books, and I just kept taking it all in. Now, what the science did for me once the science convinced me, then it opened me up personally. So now I could recognize these things, that were happening. So, grief is a process. I mean, there is no, sometimes I bristle when people say that, they need closure. There really is no closure when somebody close to you that you love, dies. There's always going to be a hole in your heart to a certain degree, but you can once you come to believe that you're going to see them again or that they still exist, you can live with more meaning and purpose, knowing that's going to happen. And you can choose to, look, at the beginning, for the first couple of years after my daughter passed, I was a basket case. I mean, I wanted to die. I didn't see any reason for going on. I didn't know how I could possibly, resume my life. But I was able to transform my grief to a certain degree by all the stuff that we're talking about. So don't be so close-minded about everything. Just because your teachers taught you something, or your clergy tells you something, or the media tells you something, the scientists tell you something, it doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just remain open and you form your own opinions based upon what you've discovered.
Yeah, I like that. Remain open, and then I especially like that you're saying, don't force it. Don't don't f- force and don't expect. Don't expect for you to wake up in the morning and your coffee cup is full of coffee and nobody's in the house, and you're thinking, "Oh, my significant other, my wife, my husband must have poured the coffee for me, and now I believe
Right.
that that's not going to happen. They're not going to pour the
Yeah.
coffee for you." So,
Yeah, and also I sometimes I talk about this and I get a lot of looks, but I don't think think it's wrong to think that everything is a sign from your loved one.
Hmm.
I don't believe that every single thing, that every single penny that you see on the ground is a sign from your loved one, and so forth. Because I think if you accept everything as a sign, that diminishes the really true communications and signs that you get.
Yeah.
So some are, and it's like everything else. Some are, and some aren't. We find that there's in everything in life. So some things are really profound. For instance, if using that example, I mean, if I have a dream at night, like a dream visitation from my loved one, and my loved one says to me, "I'm going to leave a penny, with my birth date on it for you to see," and then the next day I'm walking and I happen to see a penny and I pick it up and it has that birth date, I'd give that a lot of weight,
Hmm.
compared to, because I was told it or I asked for it and then I got it, and so it lessens the possibility that it's a coincidence. So some things are, don't accept everything
Yeah.
at face value, but treasure the true things that you do get.
So, in other words, just because I keep asking and asking for those winning lottery numbers from my deceased, and I'm not getting it, don't dismiss it that they aren't there listening or anything like that.
That's right. People sometimes ask, do our loved ones in spirit, are they aware of everything that we do? They're afraid, like, do they follow me in the bathroom? Are they constantly with me? I had I'll just tell you this quickly. I had an incident where that same medium that's a friend of ours sent me an email one morning, and the night before I was sitting in my kitchen and I was washing dishes, and sometimes I'll talk to my wife out loud, So then I'm alone, I talk to her, and I said to her, "Fran, I don't care what you say. This kitchen was poorly designed because every time I wash the damn dishes, the water splashes all over the place. Stupid thing." That's just what I said to him. The next morning, I get an email from this medium. She said, "Bob, I was meditating, doing my personal meditation in the morning, and in the middle of the meditation, Fran came through and she said, you got to get in touch with Bob and let him know about the kitchen sink." So that to me tells me that, yeah, they are paying attention, because what are the odds? I say that out loud, a couple of hours before, and then out of the blue, she interrupts, this medium's meditation and gets a message to me, the kitchen sink. Could have been a million, 10 million different possibilities, right? So to me, that tells me it's my personal proof that they pay attention.
Wait a second. I talk about things, and next thing I know, Google or Alexa's got an ad about what I'm talking about.
That's something different, Chuck.
And there she is in the background saying she did not understand. Um, you know, this conversation is really great and really interesting, and I think it's really meaningful for a lot of people, especially right now during this holiday season, the Christmas, the holiday. And I say that because, you know, Charles Dickens' story, Christmas Carol, you've got your spirits, the ghosts that show you the past, the present, the future, and all that. So, was that real? Was that something from his mind? Uh, but what I want to get on right now is how do people get a hold of, or what do they do if they want to contact you through your Forever Family Foundation? Is there a website and your Medium Explosion book? Because all these things, I wrote down a bunch of words while I was watching, and actually, while I was watching your episode on Netflix, I started jotting down some words, some one-liners, and of how what I was thinking and feeling, and then what I thought. And I'll tell you, 95% of these words popped up. Just to give you some things, I wrote down guilt, grief, belief, belief for healing, relaxation, and meditation, being mindful or mindfulness, altered state of consciousness, and the big one for me was daydreaming, memories, and I put imagine and imagination, be open, and have hope. So those are all the words that came to me while I was watching the program, and these are almost like a uh, not a self-help, but and not closure, as you were saying too, because you don't close things off. But the biggest thing at the end was to have hope, and to be open. Um, So things, organizations, foundations like such as yours and your book really do help people to get in touch or to feel better. So how and where do they find you and all this information?
Well, the website is for Forever Family Foundation, 3 words.org. We It has various bits of information. We also air. We've been airing a weekly radio show since 2005, and all of the past shows are archived on there. So if the chances are, if you read a book about somebody and you want to learn more, we probably interviewed them over the past 15 years. So you just click on, you can listen to the interview. We have recommended books. We have webinars. We have information on grief retreats and so forth. So it's a good resource for people that are new to this and just want to do a little exploration. We also maintain a list of certified mediums, that we've certified over the years and so forth. I write a blog on beyondthefivesenses.com, just on a personal aside. And we membership in the foundation is free. We don't charge any money. You can join. You get notified of all events and retreats and different things that are going on. So I encourage people to log on and become a member and just ride the wave of information with us.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do that, to go to the foreverfamilyfoundation.org, not .com, but .org.
Yeah, .com will work too, but
Okay, you
it's
got
it's
that as well.
not the it's foreverfamilyfoundation.org. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, because if you're experiencing any grief, as I was watching your episode on Netflix, it it can and it does and it will help you or help one heal or at least get started on the healing process. I believe that folks, each individual takes things or accept things in a different way. So if you go and you read the book or you go to the website, I might get something different, but it'll help me set myself on that path, which could be the same path as that the other person who's thinking something differently, but we are on that same path. That's how I look at foundations such as yours, which is very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And also, we see the reason we like having the grief retreats so much is that we can see the end product. Because we see people that come, they arrive for the weekend on Friday, and some people are they're really not communicating. They're very extremely wrapped up in their grief and sad and so forth. And then after the closing ceremony Sunday night, there's laughter and there's a lightness to it. And we sometimes, we'll track their progress over the years and it stays with them, so it can be a life transforming experience. Now, certainly not for everybody. Everybody's on their own path. But a great many people, it does make a difference in people's lives. So that's our favorite thing that we do.
I will say this for those folks that are out there watching and listening. If you don't believe, think about this. How many times have you gone to look for your car keys or your keys or something, and you swear that's where it was or is because you always put it there and it's not there? And then you walk away and you're looking around and you come back and it's there. Who did it?
Right. And how many times are you thinking of a friend that you haven't talked to in 20 years, and then the phone rings and it's that friend? Yes. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So there's something out there at work. So you
Yeah.
really have to keep your mind open to all of the possibilities.
Right.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, this is something that I would love to just continue talking more and more about because we just scratched the surface and we didn't even get into reincarnation. We didn't really get into uh, daydreaming. We didn't get into dream interpretations and things like that, which I think in itself is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, certainly could talk about this for hours. I mean,
Yes.
and there's a lot of evidence that we could talk about in each discipline that's very compelling. So it's important stuff. Maybe we can do it another time.
Yes, I am absolutely open to that. And with that being said, thank you very, very much. I mean, this has been fantastic, and it's been, you know, more of an education and eye opening for me as well. So, um,
Yeah, appreciate it. It's my pleasure being here. You ask a lot of good questions, and I could tell you're one of those. You're like me. You're one of those open-minded skeptics that follows the evidence.
yeah, evidence. Yep. I'm
Okay.
still waiting for the little green men up there someplace, though. Show me the evidence.
Yeah.